Election is around the corner, and we employ the society to say no to discrimination and also encourage the government to have an accessible and inclusive election and electoral processes. Welcome to another episode of the program Disability Voice from the Advent Cable Network, Nigeria. I am Favor Agara, your beautiful host. The Disability Voice program is created basically to educate the religious center and the general public that persons with disability can be loved, can be enabled, can be empowered, and can be educated, because disability is not a stigma. It is also to advocate for the interests and the rights of persons with disabilities. Viewers, today we'll be looking at a very interesting topic that says persons with disability participating in election and the electoral processes. And here with me in the studio to handle this topic is Mr. Ambi Peter. Mr. Ambi Peter is a consultant and also an M&E, Monetary and Evaluation Specialist. You're welcome, Mr. Peter.
Thank you very much.
Good to have you in today's program.
Thank you for having me.
Also, let me not forget to mention that he is also a disability advocate. Yes. You're welcome once again.
Thank you very much.
So, let's talk politics as it concerns us, persons with disabilities.
Okay.
Yes. So now, the general election is few days to today, and you look at it, government is putting things in place, money is lying everywhere, people are running here and there, campaigning to make sure they contest for their parties or their opponent, or they stand against. Now, do you think access is being provided for persons with disabilities? Or do you think persons with disability should go out there and exercise their civic right as a citizen of the country?
Well, I think right from the onset, from the continuous voters registration, we have seen that federal government have deployed quite a number of mechanisms on ground to see to it that everybody has access to registration, which of course is that will now grant you that permit to have your permanent voters card that will enable you to cast your vote. But during these processes, we see to it that some people were actually disenfranchised, not, I would say, deliberately, but it was somehow accidental. Persons with disability are also part of that chunk number of persons that were disenfranchised by virtue of not deploying a lot of those machines in order to, to register voters or potential voters. So that has actually disenfranchised some people to a large extent, I would say. But getting to your question, I think it's a very good one that federal government have done by bringing in the BVAS, which of course is biometric verification as well as accreditation system. That machine on its own has already, it has co-opted people with disability as well as people not with disability into it, giving them that very platform or access to register and then to also be accredited by the time the voting starts. So that, to a large extent, it has engulfed everybody into the system to give them that access to cast their vote. So not only on that very aspect, on various aspects, because after the act, which of course that act was basically for the discrimination against persons with disability. That act was signed and it came to limelight in 2019. That act on its own has given them more mandate. It has given them more power. It has given them that rights and privileges they've been looking for. And that, by implication, has already made it possible for them to have access to some of those things that ordinarily they wouldn't have. And that is why government did all the best they can to deploy all the necessary machines to ensure that people with disabilities are being captured in order for them to have access to voting.
So access is in place. Okay, so that brings me to these questions. I remember a colleague of mine was saying he went to a particular registration center. Okay, let's come to the registration process now, whereby he saw a lady with disability, that's a wheelchair user. She could not even access where they were doing the capturing. You know, after you register, you know, we have to do the capturing, physical capturing now. But she could not access. Why? Because the hindrances of staircase, her wheelchair could not go in, and she was so devastated. But at a long run, you know, other citizens that were around, they helped her to lift the chair and moved her. So what do you have to say about that? Because we have so many of that. Then we also have the situation of a deaf person going to a center whereby there's no sign language interpreter. Wow. How will such person communicate? So do you think that government has really done enough to say that during the election, yes, we are able to, even those of us that are able to get our PVC, now, do you think government have done enough that on the day of the election, we'll be able to access voting? Like we'll vote our right and vote our conscience on that day.
Thank you very much for that question. Favor, if I will actually go by what you are saying, I think federal government in its own magnanimity they have tried to some extent. But I believe quite sure that after that act was signed in 2019, the transition period that was given for that act to come to full implementation was 5 years. So if you count from 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23, so virtually we are having less than 5 years. And I believe quite sure that they are doing everything possible to see to it that the provision of that law is in place. And that is why they first of all start with the beavers. It's very unfortunate that in Nigeria, you know how we do things. They wouldn't like to act when it is time for them to act. It is only when time is not on their side, they will begin to apply fire brigade approach to see to it that those things really come to play. And it's not rocket science. In other places, in other climes, these things are things that immediately the act comes to fall. They will begin to see to it that everything is well implemented from day one. But Nigeria will not do that. Now, what I'm actually trying to say is that there is need for us to start advocacy. That advocacy has already been started to some extent. Thank God that the Commission for Persons with Disability is in place already, with the Executive Secretary coordinating the affairs of that commission. And that, by extension, has extended that very right and privileges to every person living with disability.
Persons with disabilities.
Persons living with disability. So to say, if I'm going to use the right language there, we call it impairment because disability has ability in it. So let me just say they are impaired to some extent. So they have their rights to advocate for some of those things that are not in place to be in place. So in as much as we have few days to the election, there are some of those things that cannot actually be achieved, but in the long run, they can. So in the short run now, what are those things that we need to put in place to ensure that it gives them access to vote and be voted for? These are the things we need to begin to agitate, to see to it that, okay, the voting points is brought to a lower level such that persons with disability who have impairment with either limbs or hands can be able to access those platforms in order for them to cast their vote. These are some of the immediate needs that we need to actually resolve. Thank you
so much. Thank you so much for that insight. So I still want to go further. Sorry, I'm boring you with so many questions, but you know, election period, we just need to get involved. Of course. Personally, I really want to get involved, but I've not been given the opportunity yet. Although, should I say that I've not started? We'll get there. We'll get there someday. So talking of being voted for participation, do you think, yes, you are a disability advocate and a consultant in the OPDs communities. Now, let me ask this. Do you think persons with disability are able to participate in the electoral process? Like monitoring elections, trying to get data of how the election is going. Do you think, or because during the process, or even before the primaries, and we had the numbers of persons with disability that showed interest of they want to head a position, 1 or 2 positions, but unfortunately, most of them lost out of the race. Now, it is the re-election period, the general election period. Do you think persons with disability should be given the chance to get involved in the electoral processes, like the monitoring, and at least you are a monitoring and evaluation officer, so do you think I can do that? Do you think the government, the legislation, they should give me that opportunity to get involved as a citizen of the country?
Why not? The provision of the National Constitution, which of course the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Section 42, it has afforded, or it has guaranteed, the freedom to participate in some of these civic duties without any form of discrimination. And that is where the Disability Rights Act actually drives its powers from. And so there is no any person living with disability or any person with disability that should be discriminated upon based on the virtue of that very provision. So if somebody with disability has been discriminated upon at any point in time, at the course of this very general election, that person has the right, he has the legal rights to actually see to it that he has filed a lawsuit to that effect and make whoever that discriminated him to face the consequences of their action. That right is already there, and you can begin to claim those rights. So I've been a monitoring and a domestic observer for quite some time in the general election. I've never seen someone with disability. I've observed election in Abuja here and beyond Abuja. I've never seen somebody with disability. So to coming down to your question, I think there is need for us to begin to see these things now come into play. Because why? The Act has already given them that very power. And the reason for this very Act is to see to it that any person who violates the provision of that very Act, that person should be brought to book. So I am actually challenging all those persons with disability out there to come out and begin to see how they can participate fully in the election process. The election processes include for you to actually vote and be voted for. You can also be part and parcel of domestic observer at any given point in time. And whoever that has discriminated you at one point or the other, please feel free and open up to report that matter so that the law will actually take its course from that very point.
Thank you so much for that comment and that advice. Viewers, we are still talking politics, but before we continue with the conversation, we'll go on a short break. When we come back, we'll continue. Don't go anywhere.
Now streaming, now analyzing, now assessing, now discussing, now sharing your thoughts on everything and every issue that affects you. ACNN's Now Streaming discusses the issues trending and the matters that matter to us all. Join us every Monday to Friday at 10 a.m. on ACNN as we go in-depth into every issue that impacts our lives, our communities, and our country.
Welcome back, viewers. If you are just joining us, this is the program, The Disability Voice. And today we are still discussing the issue of persons with disability participating in the election and the electoral processes. And still with me in the studio is Mr. Ambi Peter. Mr. Ambi Peter is a consultant, a monitoring and evaluation specialist. Thank you for staying with us. So before we actually went on the break, we were talking of if government should give persons with disabilities opportunity. Is it really opportunity now, or is their right to participate in the electoral processes? Now, you said something that said you urge persons with disability to come out and participate because it's our right. Okay, there are so many factors. There are so many factors when we talk of elections. Some of us will be thinking of the violence, some of us will be thinking of the discrimination and so on and so forth. So if we look at this stigmatization, the violence, yes, the law is in place, but you can't do anything about the law because the law has 5 years windows frame, which is still counting. So what do you say about that?
Well, I'm actually beginning to see to it that it's actually allowed for 5 years transition period. This transition period is to put the necessary mechanism on ground to ensure that people with disability have access to some of the social amenities that is in the society. That does not really stop them or deprive them the rights to advocate or to ask for some of those basic rights. These are fundamental rights that has already been given to them by the provision of the Act. So definitely, I am actually looking at it. They can start advocating for this right or asking for these rights and privileges from the day that law was signed, or not really act as per se, that bill was signed into law. So the moment Mr. President signs that, they can start asking and demanding for these rights to be released or to be made available to them. That is exactly what is there. So in as much as they are having that 5 years moratorium, it doesn't really stop them from asking, because this 5 years transition period that we're talking about is for those things that are not in place to begin to be put in place, like the building designs that does not really have, persons with disability in mind at the time of planning. Those buildings can begin to take another shape by those who designed that very plan. They begin to make access route. I thank God that I was in a shop, what was that? Market Square, so to say. And I discovered that building actually has an exit and entrance point for persons with disability. Every building that I'm entering now, I always try to check the design of such building. And every commercial buses that are available or they are bringing in now, they're supposed to have that plan in place to see to it that persons with disability have access to those facilities like any other person. I think they can start demanding for those right now, not after the 5 years moratorium that we're talking about.
But the truth is, let me say, I'm not commending. Let me not say I'm commending the general public, because to some extent, okay, let me say I'm commending some people for making access in their own organization. It's just like this St. Matthias house now. If you look at it, you find that the entrance is staircase, but if you come to the other side of it, you will see a provision for it's even double ramp, whereby if you are two coming, you don't need to wait for one, you just need to pass the other place, and the advocacy is actually on. People are really putting their infrastructure in place, but we still have the ones, especially government infrastructures. It's even the government that signed the bill to law now. Let's talk about the government now before we come to private. You know, they are even the ones that most of them, their buildings are not accessible. Like this registration unit we are talking about, the PVC, they are government facilities, and most of them are not accessible. Yes, you know, disability differs. I have my own type of disability. Another person can have a different disability that where I can access, that person cannot access. Like someone who uses wheelchair now cannot access where I can easily access. Is differ. But government needs to do something in a way that everybody enhance and obey the law. And just like what you've said, it is our right. We come out and demand for our right. If you are listening to us out there, it is my right to access, as far as you are doing business with that building. Everybody is coming. It is my right to also come in and do business. And
they don't design it in such a way that it will afford persons with disability to have access to that very facility. You can actually begin to demand for those rights, and you can sue them.
Yes, of course.
Once if those things are not put in place. Let the commission know, because you need to escalate the issue. At that very point where you discover that your rights are being trampled upon, the moment you discover that some of those things that need to be in place are not there, you should begin to ask for them with immediate effect. Don't wait until when Mr. B comes in and raise alarm before you will now begin to say, yes, I was also there now. In fact, I experienced it. Why didn't you raise alarm? So we need to begin to raise alarm to see to it that most of those things are actually put in place, especially places of voting. Those voting points, they need to be rescheduled. What I mean by reschedule is that pick that polling unit where it is and take it to a place that persons with disability can have access to them. Because failure to do so, you are violating the provision of the Act. Discrimination Against Persons with Disability Prohibition Act 2019. And you can be sued for that. Yes.
Thank you so much for advocating on our behalf. We need more voices. So with this, what would be your advice to INEC? The general election is forthcoming, and we need Braille for the blind. We need sign language for the deaf. We need ramps for wheelchair users. And also we need caregivers for as many persons with disability that will come to any of these polling units to vote. So what advice will you give to INEC as they are preparing just a few days away to the general election, if Jesus tarries and God's willing? What advice will you advise INEC to make sure the election is accessible and inclusive for persons with disability?
Thank you, Favor, for that very wonderful question. I am actually advising INEC, if you are watching me or you are looking at me.
They are, of course.
I'm advising you that you should begin to take the bull by the horn to ensure that most of those items that will make it accessible for persons with disability, those facilities, those instruments, those equipment that is needed for them or to make life easy for them at the cost of this very general election, please make sure that those things are in place. Because I know that they have realized that they have rights, and they will begin to ask and advocate for these rights. Not any other time, but now. So if you are looking at me or you are listening to me at the moment, I ask you, or I am actually appealing to you to some extent, if I will use a calm language or a language that's, will make you feel, some sense of respect for, as a commission, I'm asking you to please make sure that those facilities that are not in place and all those equipment that are not in place for persons with disability, we are talking about Braille, we're talking about
sign language.
Sign language, because they need all that. there are people with impairments that need most of those equipments. Please ensure that you ask for those equipments to be in place at the course of this very election. If not, a large percentage of persons with disability, and they are Nigerians, like any other person, they will be disenfranchised. And we wouldn't want that to happen. The time to act is now.
Thank you so much for that wonderful advice. We hate that the time is just running faster, but there's nothing we can do about it. We want to appreciate you for coming to the program today, and thank you for being a voice to the community of persons with disabilities. And we hope to have you in the program again in some other time, and hope you'll be available to honor our invitation. Thank you so much for coming. So viewers, this is where we draw the curtain for today's episode, The Disability Voice. We talked about participation of persons with disability in the general election and also the processes. Before we come your way again, same time, same station next week, remember, disability is everyone's business, and it is my right to participate as a citizen of the country. Please make the society accessible and inclusive for everyone. Thank you so much for staying back, and we hope to see you again, same time, same station next week. Before then, remain blessed. I remain Favor Agara, your host. Bye for now.